Hello, this video is all about thesis statements. What are they, how do you create one, and what constitutes a strong thesis? So to start with, I actually want to start by describing what a thesis is not. In writing, there's not a whole lot of absolutes I can give you. You know, there's always like this rule and then an exception, this rule and then an exception, or guideline really. I don't even say rule, it's more of a guideline and then there's an exception. Well, with a thesis statement, there actually is a few things that I can sort of give you that hold truth. These are not thesis statements. And it can kind of help you understand then what a thesis is when we switch to the definition of what a thesis actually is. So the first thing that it is not is it's never just going to be a fact. And so when we think of facts, a fact is something that the majority of people sort of already agree on. Something like smoking is bad for your health. It's a fact. We know it, right? It's not something, it doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree with smoking, but that's something that as a society we agree is a fact. And so that type of information is never going to be a thesis statement. A quote, a paraphrase, or a summary is also not a thesis. Those are coming from sources, they're other people's ideas, and a thesis, when it's your own writing, is always going to be your own idea. And if you're reading an article or you're reading a text, then that article or that text will have a thesis by that author. So again, whoever is doing the writing, that's whose information, whose ideas reflect in the thesis or what makes up the thesis. Thesis also isn't a question. A question hints at a thesis. It's like saying, hey, I'm kind of going to be talking about this topic. But it doesn't actually give a clear sense of direction. It's not actually a thesis statement. So a thesis is not going to be a question. And then finally, a thesis is not an announcement. So an announcement would be something like, in this essay, I plan to talk about, and then you give your plan, but you don't actually say what you're going to say about that topic. You're just giving kind of an introduction to what the topic of the essay is, not the actual thesis. And again, that's an announcement. You're announcing what you plan to do, but you're not actually doing anything yet. And that is not a thesis. So a thesis is, by the most basic definition, it's what the whole essay is about, all right? And that's, again, the most basic way to think of it. But really what a thesis does is it relates your stance, your opinion, or your argument on a particular topic. It also covers all the main ideas included in your essay. So if you want to think of a thesis as like an umbrella, and then the rest of your essay is everything that falls underneath that umbrella, that can sometimes be kind of a useful way to think of it. A thesis is also going to be specific to your essay, meaning that, say we're in a class, we're all writing on the same topic. I shouldn't be able to just copy and paste my thesis into someone else's essay and have it still make sense. Same thing in reverse shouldn't be able to happen. So again, the thesis needs to be specific to my essay, to my content, not to another students in the class. It also needs to give a clear sense of direction for your readers. So this is really the point of your introduction, or the part of your introduction that sets up the direction for the rest of your essay. Now, some general thesis guidelines, and I do use the term guidelines here. They're not rules, they're not absolute. It's just these are kind of good suggestions. The thesis usually is going to come towards the beginning of the essay at the end of the introduction paragraph. Now, it doesn't have to go there. There is no rule that says it has to go there. It just makes logical sense to put it there because you've had some time to introduce the topic, you're leading up, and then you get to your thesis at the end of that introduction, and this is the direction that the rest of your essay is going. If you don't have a thesis at the beginning, sometimes what happens is your essay becomes hard to follow and it impacts the readability of your essay. Your audience can be a little bit lost along the way. Some other guidelines, thesis typically 1 to 2 sentences in length. They shouldn't be entire paragraphs. And it's not saying they can't be. If I'm writing like an entire book, I might have a much longer thesis. But the reality is in college, you're working, especially in most first, second year college courses, with somewhere between a 2 to 8 page essay. That's not enough to need more than 1 or 2 sentences to fully give the direction and your thesis. The thesis should answer or address any writing prompt that you're given. So in college courses, you're typically given some sort of, hey, you need to write about this or answer this question. So your thesis should literally be the answer to that. It should use concrete, specific language. So in other words, you want to stay away from things that are really vague. You want to use the most sort of descriptive language you can while not becoming overly wordy. And that's going to help make sure that your thesis is clear, which comes to the last point. Oh, except it got cut off. So it says, should have a clear statement that covers all of your ideas, and it should have on there, even though it doesn't, but without listing them all out. So you don't want to list every single point in your thesis. You want it to give an overview of your essay, but again, not list out every single idea. And sorry that got cut off. I'm not sure what happened there. So here's some specific strategies for writing a thesis, because thesis statements are hard, first of all. They're probably one of the more difficult pieces of writing your essay. So just a general kind of guideline, if you are writing and you ever get really stuck at your introduction or your first paragraph, do a different paragraph and go back to it later. Sometimes that can help you kind of rethink and figure out what you want to say, but don't ever just kind of sit and stare blankly at the computer. That's not going to be useful. So here's some specific strategies though for coming up with that thesis statement. First of all, if there's an actual writing prompt question, answer it. So here's an example. Here's a writing prompt. Should community colleges offer free tuition for all students? The thesis then could say something like, community college should only offer free tuition for students who show financial need. So it's not agreeing or disagreeing with the writing prompt. It's kind of taking an in-between stance. It's saying yes, but, right? Yes, but only for those students who actually show some financial need. That's a perfectly fine thesis, and it clearly addresses the writing prompt, which is what you want to know. Then whatever follows in that essay should be the reasons why they feel that it should be offered to students who show financial need, right? That would be what comes after. Second strategy, you can list out the topic, your opinion on the topic, and your reasoning for that opinion, and then sort of put those all together for the thesis. So here's a different writing prompt. It says, how does social media affect teenagers' self-image? All right. Social media causes teenagers to have a false sense of reality because posts tend to make people's lives seem more perfect than they are in real life. So the writing prompt, the topic is social media affecting teenagers. Immediately we have social media causes teenagers. So that's the topic, right? Then the opinion is, well, how does it affect them? Well, this student thought that they cause a false sense of reality. So that's the student's opinion on the topic. And then the reason why they feel that way is because they believe that people's posts tend to make their lives seem more perfect than they are in real life, okay? And so it's that topic plus opinion plus reasoning that then can create a strong thesis statement. Strategy 3, you can always, if you're really stuck, just start with the topic and then build your thesis. So the writing prompt says, describe an experience from your past that impacted your life in a memorable way. So you'll see that this one isn't written as a question. It's giving a directive, right? It's telling you directly what to do. It's describe. And so the basic topic then, I'd have to think and say, okay, well, what's an experience, right, that impacted my life? This particular student said, okay, my basic topic, I'm going to write about losing my children. And then they sat back and they thought about it, and then they came back to it later and they said, okay, now let me rephrase that topic as my full thesis. Here's my thesis. On May 4th, 2011, the state took my children as I was an unsuitable parent addicted to cocaine. That day was the wake-up call I needed to start on my path to recovery. So, back to the writing prompt, it says, describe an experience from your past that impacted your life. In the thesis, it clearly states what the event was, right? There's a really specific moment where this mother, I believe it was a mother in this case, I could be wrong, had her children taken away. And that then actually started them out of this addictive habit that they have, or at least on the recovery of their addiction. And so they are not only stating, right, what the event was, but why it was memorable. So again, this offers a really clear sense of direction. There's no doubt that this is then going to be the story that they tell throughout the rest of the essay. Now, some final thesis advice. So a thesis is only part of your introduction paragraph. It is not the whole thing. So if you're writing a full essay, then you would want to make sure that you lead up to the thesis. It's sometimes taught in high schools or even lower level courses to start your introduction with your thesis. That's like kind of throwing someone in the deep end of the pool. You're not giving them any context for why you're making that statement yet. So it's much better to lead up to your thesis in the introduction rather than start with it. Now, an introduction does usually build toward the thesis. That's what I was just mentioning about. It usually comes towards the end of the introduction paragraph, right? Introduce the context for why you're making that statement, and then you make the statement. A strong thesis often sets up a clear focus point, and it can also help you with organization. So a lot of times when I see students that are really struggling with keeping a focus or with organization in their writing, I look and I'm like, oh, well, they don't have a thesis, or their thesis is so vague that it's not really giving them a clear direction to work with. So while I mentioned earlier that the thesis is sort of gives a clear direction for whoever's going to read your essay, it can also give you a clear direction while writing your essay and revising your essay to make sure that it is staying focused on that point and that topic and not wandering into some other area. And then finally, having a strong thesis reflects an awareness of your audience. And what's meant by that is that in college writing, you are not writing for yourself. You're writing for readers. Typically, it's referred to as an academic audience, though you may have teachers give you really specific audiences to write to. But you are writing for someone else. And so you have to rethink things a little bit differently than if you were doing writing all on your own just for you. So having a thesis reflects audience awareness because you're letting your readers know that direction. And again, that's something that you want to make sure that you're doing in college writing. While this video was very much about writing your own thesis statements, some of the information in this video can also be used about just understanding how to identify other people's thesis statements. So this can also be used to help you kind of figure out how to give advice to other people on their thesis statements, as well as how to maybe identify thesis statements when you're looking at other people's writing. Any questions, of course, always ask. Other than that, hope this helped you feel more comfortable with what a thesis statement actually is, what it's all about.